hear me? Can everyone hear me okay? Does that pick up okay? All right. I just like to kind of start with how many people are familiar with Whiteclay, Nebraska? So quite a few of you. How many people are familiar or have a pretty good working knowledge of fetal alcohol spectrum disorder? Okay. I wish we had a lot more than an hour because there's so much to do, but we're going to try and cover really like a little of both and in that hour. So if you guys have questions, anytime you have a question, feel free to ask it. You don't have to wait till the end. And if I'm talking too fast, just tell me to slow down a little, because sometimes I get excited and get talking way too fast. When we first started fostering, we had to fill out a piece of paper that asked us what we would parent, what we wouldn't parent. And at that time, I was actually a licensed practical nurse working on the pediatrics ward at the hospital. And I knew like basically nothing about FAS except in college I'd read The Broken Cord because the kids were from Pine Ridge and I grew up right off of Pine Ridge. And so I read the book and it scared me and I was like, yeah, want nothing to do with FAS. So when we did the paperwork, I circled 3 times no on FAS and I put, I could never parent this. So in the beginning of our journey, we never intended to parent a child with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder at all. I also put under medical stuff, I do this at work, I don't want to do this at home. And apparently our creator laughed the entire time because everything I said no to was in our very first placement and just kept going from there. But anyway, we discover sometimes that we can do things we don't know we can do. So with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, the really important thing to realize is it is brain damage. When I talk to parents, a lot of times, because you know your kids don't wear their brains on the outside of their head, and unfortunately with FASD, really less than 30% of them actually have features that distinguish them from you and I. So you're looking at someone who looks normal, who's doing things that you're like, wow, that's not normal. And what do we start doing? We start labeling them with things like, they're the class clown, they're that kid that's always in trouble, they don't try, they don't care, they're lazy. This is why people always talk about, should I ever get someone diagnosed with FASD? And yeah, because they're already getting diagnosed by society, and they've got all these ugly labels put on them. When we can say this is what it is, and these are the tools they need, we can empower them to say, okay, this may be part of your life, but it doesn't distinguish you. I mean, that's not all you are. With my kids know they have fetal alcohol syndrome. Everyone says, oh, so then they can use it as a crutch. I don't allow that. I'm a pretty hardcore mom. Like we say, you have fetal alcohol syndrome. It's part of who you are. It's not all of who you are. It means you may have to work harder sometimes or differently than other people, but you can do anything anyone else can do. And so I don't believe any diagnosis is a crutch unless you let it be. This is very extreme. But I use this in the parenting group because most parents always, when are they going to get it? When are they going to get it? When are they going to get it? When are they going to stop doing that? Well, here's the thing. With FASD and when we're working with families, the family's going to do all the work. They're going to help that child navigate their path. And so the kid's never going to get it. You're going to give them every tool they need so that they can do what they need to do. And a lot of parents struggle with that. So we talk about if your child was in a really traumatic car accident and had a severe TBI, would you expect that they will just one day not have had that TBI? And they're like, oh, well, no. Well, this is a TBI in utero. So you look at a normal brain. These are actually 2 6-week-old infants who passed away. The infant on the left, had nothing to do with this brain. This is a beautiful brain, wonderfully delineated, lots of oxygen. Look at the color, good blood flow. When you look at the right brain, you can tell it's much smaller. That's a very unhealthy color. There should be all sorts of blood flow into that brain. That brain does not have that blood flow. So we know that that brain actually was part of the reason that this child didn't survive. When we go through the spectrum, we now have lots and lots of alphabet soup stuff going on. FASD is fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. No one's diagnosed with FASD. They're diagnosed with one of the conditions under that spectrum. So we have fetal alcohol syndrome. Depending on what diagnostic criteria you're using, you're looking for either 2 or 3 of the cardinal features and a lot of central nervous system damage. Partial fetal alcohol syndrome, I hate this diagnosis. I'm just going to be really honest, because when we deal with people, even professionals, they're like, well, they only partially have fetal alcohol syndrome. That just means they have one of the 3 cardinal features. It doesn't have anything to do with their brain damage. It's kind of like being partially pregnant. You are or you aren't. So I kind of wish we'd just get rid of that one. But anyway, no one cares what I think. So ARND is now replacing fetal alcohol effect because people felt fetal alcohol effect was too confusing. So now we have alcohol-related neurodevelopmental disorder because it just flows right off your tongue and it's real easy to understand. But and then we have ARBD, alcohol-related birth defects. That's not a diagnosis you see very often, just because usually those children are severe enough that they're going to already have an FAS diagnosis. But we talk a lot about the brain, and the fact is that alcohol is a solvent. It can kill any developing cell. So what you have to understand is it can affect any part of that developing fetus. Bones, heart, lung, connective tissue, any of that can be affected. So with alcohol-related birth defects, it's where we're recognizing that this child has birth defects that are secondary to the prenatal exposure. SEAE is static encephalopathy, alcohol exposed. This is kind of the chicken doctor giving a diagnosis, because they're not saying they're FASD, but what they're saying is we know there's brain damage, which is static encephalopathy, and we know they were alcohol exposed, so we're just going to say they're both. You don't see it very often, but some neurologists use that as their kind of get out of jail free card. It's a way of not fully diagnosing. And then the new diagnosis, and this is because there has always been this fight over who's going to own FASD, the medical or the mental health world. And the fact is that both of them need to, because there is medical components, but there's very much so mental health components. So at the end of the DSM-5, up for consideration will be neurobehavioral disorder associated with prenatal alcohol exposure. The hope is we're going to really get the ability to serve people in the mental health community with this eventually. Right now, like my program, we are able to, there's almost always something else going on, depression, anxiety, PTSD, something that we can bill under and still provide services. Because right now, as a mental health organization, we can't actually bill under fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. Are there any questions about the quick, this is FASD? Okay. It'll get a lot more exciting now. So most of my kids come from the Oglala Lakota Nation. And this is a beautiful, beautiful country. We'll see some pictures in a minute. The 2005 census shows a population of 15,521 over a 3 million acre reservation. However, their director for housing is going to tell you that it's closer to 40,000. The problem is people are very transient. There are people that they wandered. They went from place to place, hunting ground to hunting ground, and that's really very much in their culture. And so a lot of people don't have an address that they call home. They may stay with this relative for a while, and then they stay with this relative, and then they might go to Nebraska for a while, and they might go to Rapid City for a while, and then they go back to Pine Ridge. And so this is a very hard number to really calculate and tabulate. I laughed because a friend of mine, she, for graduate school, she was doing a survey, and they had sent her, and they were wanting her to go around to the reservations, and they gave her all these addresses. And I'm like, oh yeah, have fun with that. She found like 3 people off of the address list because, first of all, there's no like road signs and addresses on houses. And anyway, so, being able to get a population count is pretty hard. The statistics for Pine Ridge are pretty bleak. You have 80% unemployed, and some people say that's higher. 49% of them are living below the federal poverty line, and then 61% below the age of 18 are living below that. If you look up the poorest counties in the United States, Todd County and Shannon County are like second and fifth, and that's what pretty much makes up the Pine Ridge Reservation. So people always talk about, well, they have a casino, because a lot of other tribes, have casinos, and they're able to disperse some money to their people. And here's the thing: if they equally disperse that on the reservation, each family or each resident would get 15 cents a month. So that's not really going to be the answer to poverty on Pine Ridge, unless we can, I guess, get a lot more people gambling there. But it's just not, because the one thing too is they have a beautiful resort there. And if you guys ever want to go somewhere kind of cool, Prairie Wind Casino is really neat. They've got a beautiful hotel, but you can't have alcohol because the tribal reservation is dry. So a lot of people don't choose to go there for vacation. Growing up there, it's beautiful, and you drive around and there's just so much beauty. And then, as you see houses popping up, you realize the level of poverty. One of my daughters had never been to Pine Ridge. She's from Pine Ridge, but she had been born in Rapid City and raised in Rapid City most of her life. And so we took her down there, and she's making fun of these abandoned houses. And we're like, they're not abandoned houses. These are homes. These are family homes. And usually about 18 to 22 people would live in this home. So this is the living conditions. As I said, Pine Ridge has been dry forever since they became a reservation. They've never had alcohol. They have a tribal ordinance 8801. The Whiteclay extension was a 50-mile extension off of the Pine Ridge Reservation border that was put there so that alcohol peddlers could not sell onto the reservation, because as soon as the reservation was formed, all these people started trying to put trading posts right out there to sell alcohol and get goods off of the reservation. And the president realized that we need to do something because this is a problem. So they made the Whiteclay extension, and that was a federal order. And it was never to be undone until basically it's not needed to protect the Indians receiving rations and annuities at the Pine Ridge Agency. However, in 1904, Teddy Roosevelt disbanded it because some people he knew wanted some of that land. So he disbanded it even though alcoholism was still an issue, because by the executive order it should have never been taken apart until that wasn't a problem. Now in 2013, a lot of people are confused because in 2013 there were some articles about Pine Ridge voting on legalizing alcohol. They realized they had voter fraud, and so they had sent the votes out to another agency to look at to make sure whether the tribe had actually voted yes or no. Somehow the votes were lost. It went back before the tribal board to decide if they wanted to revote. And the tribal council at this time has said no, they will remain a dry reservation. So alcohol has still to this day never been sold on Pine Ridge. That being said, we have this unincorporated village that's 200 yards off of the South Dakota border that has, they say they have 12 people. The Highway Patrol says they have 9. I'm not sure where anyone lives in Whiteclay, so I'm not even sure they have 9, but we'll go with 9. There's a lot of abandoned buildings. There's a lot of refuse. These are just some pictures we took during one of the many times we walked through. Senator Patty Passing Brooks actually took this picture. Next to a mattress and all this garbage are these baby shoes. And it is like going into a third world country. You know, you go from the beautiful hills and you drive down the road and you go into this little 1 block parcel of land that's 4 liquor stores, an auto parts deal, and an abandoned building. And at any time of day that you go there, you're going to see people laying passed out on the street. There's burned out cars, and lots of times there's kids sitting in those cars eating crackers and stuff, sometimes only in a diaper in the middle of winter. When you walk around, if you walk around long enough, I always tell people you need to, if you see cars stopping and trying to get people in the car, follow them because they're trying to pick somebody up. There's lots of pandering, human trafficking, people that are obviously intoxicated are going in and out, continuing to get beer and pass out in the middle of the street. It's not uncommon to see fights or someone being hurt. So people, when they talk about Whiteclay, they always say, well, it's legal to have a business, and it is legal to have a business. However, Nebraska has a lot of wonderful laws about really who should have a liquor license and who should not have a liquor license. And under the 10 statutes to have a liquor license, Whiteclay stores meet none of those statutes, not one. One of them is adequate law enforcement. We saw a woman thrown out of a car with her pants down. She'd obviously been sexually assaulted. The car took off, and she's laying in the middle of the street. And so we went and called for help. And we waited an hour and 15 minutes until finally a friend of hers came and said he would take her to the hospital. No one came. And that's not uncommon. So adequate law enforcement, there is not. Because Rushville is, Frank, how far is Rushville? 22 miles? Okay, 22 miles to the nearest actual sheriff's department. And really and honestly, they get Whiteclay calls and they're like, yeah. So, and getting an ambulance, dream on. Sometimes you can get Pine Ridge to come if they're able to do that, but otherwise you're better off probably taking somebody to get their help themselves. The fact is that a lot of times, you know, when I come and I've talked in front of the legislature here and I've talked in front of the Liquor Commission, and they say, well, you're from South Dakota. You're right, I am. However, my kids' parents drank in Whiteclay and then went to Pine Ridge Hospital and had their babies, and then their babies got flown to Rapid, and then South Dakota took custody, and so technically South Dakota is paying for them, but Nebraska created them. And, you know, there was an article in the paper how Nebraska was going to go after Colorado because they had to increase their law enforcement on the border because people were bringing pot into Nebraska. And they're like, Colorado should pay for that. Okay, I'll agree with that when they pay for all the cost of FASD in South Dakota. I'll be behind them 100%. Because we're going to talk about those costs, and they're ugly. And that's the dollar and cents cost. I'm going to possibly show you, depending on time, some of the human costs too. So I told you, I mean, they're just right there together. We talked about the 14 residents, it's actually 9. Okay, so they sell 3.5 million cans a year. Okay, I'm talking the 26-ounce cans of malt liquor. How many alcohol units are in a can of malt liquor? Does anyone know? 3 to 6, sometimes 7. It depends on how conservatively you figure it out. But it's not on the can. You got to go to the distributor and the manufacturer's website, and if you look hard enough, you can find all that information. And so in that can, where, you know, Budweiser says drink responsibly, in that can of juice, which is one of the new malt liquors that tastes just wonderfully like Kool-Aid, is 6 alcohol units. So it's like a 6-pack in a can. So as a woman, so that I don't binge drink, I should drink a third of that can and then put it away. How many people honestly ever do that? I mean, you open a can of beer or a can of whatever, And how many people are not going to finish that can? Most of us are going to finish that can. So right away they've ruined their message of drink responsibly, because you can't, not with a can of juice. And when we talk to women and you say, okay, how much did you drink a day? 6, 10, okay. Of what? Well, I drink 10 camos. Okay, camos, 5 alcohol units. That's 50 beers. Okay, that's significant. When somebody says I drank 10, you're already going, ouch, okay? But that's thinking 10 alcohol units. Well, what if they drank 10 cans with 5 alcohol units? Then you've got 50. So this is how, and most people say they can't be drinking that much. Okay, that is how embedded and how terrible the alcoholism is. They've built up this immunity and ability to drink more and more and more. Some of the blood alcohol levels of women that we're taking into detox are incredible. The fact that they're walking around is scary, because most of us would have died of alcohol poisoning. So, the one thing though, everyone that you meet there, the spirit is still there, and the beautiful things about their culture and them are still there. And I think the thing that makes me cry is when I work there, I work at the high school, but I spend lunch hour, go to Whiteclay and talk to people, and there's a couple on the streets, Happy and Sue. And Sue is in end-stage liver disease, and so she's having some pretty significant seizures and just lots of issues. She's not doing well. And the last time I was there, she had a really massive seizure and just went down and hit her head so hard, and we were trying to get her to go to the hospital and trying to get an ambulance to come, and she's crying, and I said, what's going on, and she said, I just need you to know I wasn't always this person. I'm a good person. And that breaks my heart, because I'm like, honey, you still are a good person, but the story's there, and the fact that so many people have really given up on themselves is hard to take. And that's why when people ask me, because I'm going to talk about some of my kids, don't you hate their birth mothers, or don't you hate? No, because FASD on Pine Ridge is 3 to 5 generations in. My daughter Ariana, that I'm going to talk about in a little bit, her mom is as affected as she is in so many ways. She's so sweet, and she'll tell you what she drank, and she can't understand why Ari's so sick, and she can't remember to visit Ari because time means nothing. So she'll show up 6 months to a year later, and then she's like, she changed, what happened, and she just doesn't understand. So hating her, punishing her would do what to fix the issue? Nothing. She's as much a victim as Ariana is, and as much a victim as her own mother was. So these are things where, making all the laws that, South Dakota has a law where if you admit you're drinking while pregnant, we can lock you up and take your kids. And what's happened since we've had that law? Women aren't seeking prenatal care, and we've actually had FASD increase over 50%. So those laws don't help. And I guess I forgot to say, these cans of malt liquor are $1.25 to $1.75 a can. So you're able to buy your 6-pack in a can for $1.75. So we used to have some statistics on the CDC for FASD. It was 1 in 1,000. And it's gone down to 1 in 20, and everyone goes, oh my God, what happened? Okay, first I want to explain. The first CDC numbers were off of passive studies. This was only birth record studies. It is so rare to have somebody diagnosed at birth with FASD. The mean age of diagnosis is 10. So, going off birth records, we came up with approximately 1 in 1,000. The study for 1 in 20 came off of the Phaser study 3 years ago, where they took 3 different cities and they studied all of the first graders in the school systems in those cities. And they were able to extrapolate out that we have about 1 in 20 children being born in the U.S. with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. I found 1 in 1,000 scary. 1 in 20 is pretty scary. We need to wake up and get moving on some plans to change that. But But on Pine Ridge in 1980, IHS did a study, and they had 1 in 4. Now, with the alcoholism rate at approximately 80%, I'm not sure if we studied it today that it wouldn't be higher. But 1 in 4 is bad enough. You're talking about 25% of the population being born being affected. So, I just look at that and think, how can we not see Whiteclay and the impact of Whiteclay as committing genocide? Because what we're seeing as we look at epigenetics, we've got the first generation of FASD person has some effect, and then you keep going down, and what we're seeing is a greater and greater and greater effect. And so eventually, what's going to happen, we're getting babies born now that their life expectancy is under a year because of the effect of their prenatal exposure. So eventually, it's probably going to be where we don't have sustainable life. I know in mouse studies, eventually it is where life isn't sustainable. So we talk about the generational impact, and that's the thing. What we used to see is, like learning difficulties, some behavioral issues. I did a talk at Lakota Nation Invitational, and I had an older gentleman come up to me. He was in his 90s. He said, my mom drank, and I was in trouble a lot, and I couldn't do math. He said, but I'm okay. And I'm like, yeah, first generation. That's kind of what we see. There's some issues, but not massive issues. But what we're seeing now when you get into that 3rd to 5th generation is kids who have a lot of the medical side of it. Is that, and there's so many things that play into FASD damage. I mean, mom's nutrition, stress levels, what she drank, when she drank, how much at that time. So it's not all one thing, but we definitely know that as those generations are going down, we're just seeing a much greater effect on the body. So these are some of my foster kids over the years who've had multi-system issues and just showing that effect. The reality is, no one would give a baby a glass of wine, but 7 of our 11 pregnancy books still tell you when you're pregnant to drink wine, even though we truly do not know a safe level of alcohol. We don't know how it will affect your pregnancy or your infant. And so, as a mom, it's not worth it. It's just not worth playing Russian roulette. And so, I hope the one thing that people always take away when I talk is, please don't drink if you think you could get pregnant, because it's just not worth it. But there is so much stigma and so much denial and so much just misinformation. I did a women's group for moms who were working on their addiction and also now parenting a child that was prenatally exposed. And this one girl, she just sat and mourned because she was brought up very traditionally, and her mom always told her her womb was sacred and that nothing, that sacred space, that baby was safe. And so she said, so things I did shouldn't have hurt my baby. In her mind, that meant that there was this great protective shield around her infant, and so even though she was making poor choices, her baby would be okay. And, having to talk about the fact that that's not true, that alcohol was always going to her child, was very hard for her because, people get angry at women for drinking and making bad choices, but I've never met a mom who went, oh yes, I damaged my baby. That's never the case. It's all this issue of education and understanding and addiction. People talk about choice, and I'm like, when you're dealing with addictions, you don't really have free choice and free will right then. You're dealing with a disease. So there's a lot of issues with that, and it really makes it very hard to get services to people, because when you're dealing with this child and you're thinking, I think this is a prenatally exposed child, trying to open that door to mom so that she doesn't feel like you're judging her or is really hard. And I think that that really came to me. One of our little guys had a severe heart issue, and we were sent to Denver with him. And my husband's a Native American guy, and so we're sitting there, and my son is half Native and half white, and so he assumed we were birth parents. I didn't say we weren't, and he walks in and he slams the file down, and he says, "What do you want me to do? You created this." And I went, "I'm the adoptive mom." And he went, "Oh," and 180, sits down, and we make plans for surgery. And I left there, and I was just shaking, and I thought, he wasn't going to do anything until I said that I was the adoptive mom. And my husband looked at me and said, "That was awful." And I thought, what if I wasn't the adoptive mom? And so I don't use that card anymore. I don't think anyone should have to. I know so many amazing birth moms who are seeking services for their kids who get that judgment every time they ask for help. And so that's where that stigma somehow needs to go away in order for us to really get the services to everyone they need, because right now a lot of them don't want to say, "Yes, I drank," and then have the person go, "Well, what did you expect then?" Or some sort of judgment on them. These are the pictures that every time somebody talks about Whiteclay is okay and why do I care, and it's not really that big a deal. These are the pictures that I wish not only that they had the pictures, but I guess I wish they could have some of the experience. This is Ariana that I talked about. Ariana is a beautiful 5-year-old girl now. At birth, not one system in her body was made correctly. She's had 9 surgeries to repair intestines, heart, all sorts of things. She can't eat by mouth. She eats into her jejunum. Her stomach doesn't work correctly. It won't empty, and it just won't filter food through. She'll have more surgeries as she grows. She has brittle bones. She has severe brain damage. She's pretty dependent on a lot of machines and a lot of different drugs to just kind of keep her going. And this is where we talk about the dollars and cents. And we've held Ari while she's coded. I can't even add up how many times, but I know in this hospitalization alone, the code team came 77 times. So we say she's got a warrior spirit because she kind of just refuses to die. Her doctor said she'd never make it to a year. We're at 5 so far, and we'll see how far we can go because I think she's going to prove everyone wrong. But when we were talking about Whiteclay and some of the costs, I started adding up her hospitalizations and her medical stuff, and I didn't even remember everything in here, but we went through her hospitalizations from her birth to 5 years old. It was $3.3 million. That doesn't include any of the life flights between hospitals because she's quite a traveler. She's gone all over, including here in Omaha. So, and her annual costs every year for formula medications and just regular expenses like her oxygen, suction, nebs, pulse ox, all of that stuff is about $195,240. So the state of Nebraska gets about $300,000 a year in taxes from Whiteclay, and that would pay for a year and a half of her regular expenses. And that's one child, and she's not alone. She has a sister who's here now and has never left the hospital, and she's over a year old. Her issues make Ari's look slight. So the fact is that there's such a huge human cost and there's such a huge financial cost that something has to change. And I know that getting rid of the Whiteclay stores doesn't end addiction, but when I talk to kids at the high school, they always talk about nobody gives a crap about us. Nobody cares what's happening. It's going to be the first step to show that we do. And I look at it as, I went to a conference and they talked about if you walk into a room and there's water on the floor and there's a spigot that's leaking, do you go get a bucket and a mop and clean up the water, or do you turn the spigot off? Because we do need more centers for substance abuse and detox and all of that on Pine Ridge, absolutely. But until we stop the flow over the border, it's like just leaving the spigot on and getting newer and fancier buckets and mops. We still have water on the floor. We have to stop that. And, you know, if Whiteclay isn't there, they're going to have to go further to bootleg, and there's more law enforcement. And so their ability to get it in it's going to make it harder and harder. And it's going to give us the ability to try to really keep that to a minimum. This is, let's see if I can get this to work. Oh, it's not going to do it. That's okay. I was going to bring up but we're fine without it. So, what can we do? And, you know, when I started this, I was actually at that point a stay-at-home mom, living on a ranch, thinking, what can I do? When my first 3 kids were diagnosed, I was walking out of the office and I said, well, now what? Like, where do we go for help? And how do I learn how to parent them? And what do I do? And I got, well, you haven't adopted them yet, so give them back. You still have time. They're not shoes. I'd loved these kids for 2 years. I thought, I can't give them back. They're my kids. And I went home and I cried a lot, and my husband's pretty pragmatic, and he finally said, put up or shut up. You know, if you don't like it, then do something. You know, I never imagined that I'd ever go anywhere and speak. I flunked speech in college because I was terrified of talking in front of people. So if I had looked at my life now, back then, I never would have imagined that I could do some of the things that I can do. Meeting all the students who have joined in to really educate people about Whiteclay, you know, young people are taking up that cause, and they are the people who are going to make the difference. You guys are the ones who are going to run the world soon, and, you know, some of us older guys are going to retire and not have to do that so much. But I think it's so important that everyone be educated, educate others. You know, it may just be your friend who you say, hey, you know, maybe before you go out drinking, you should take a pregnancy test because I'm worried. Or, you know, just that education to stop one child from having FASD. We can all do something, though, and we have to. I mean, this is reality for kids on Pine Ridge. You know, I do counseling at the school there, and these kids, the level of trauma they live in is insane, and I don't sometimes know how they can function and live in that level of trauma, but they do, and they're beautiful, wonderful people who, you know, are trying their best in a system where they're kind of set up to fail. Most of the kids in the high school I worked with will never graduate, and if they do, they most likely won't go on to college. We actually, 2 years ago, had a girl who got a scholarship and was doing excellent and was going to go to Black Hills State on a full ride. And she went home, and people started talking to her about, you know, you'll never make it, you'll never do this, and they're going to think you're a poor Indian girl, they're not going to like you. And she hung herself. She was one of many of the suicides that year. And it was really hard for the kids to realize that, you know, the girl who did it all and had everything couldn't even make it out. So, you know, we have to do something, and I think that conferences like these and people like you in the audience are the people who are going to help affect those changes. we do have to have a plan of action more than just shutting down the beer stores. And I agree with that. And these are things that we're working on actually with UNMC, with Senator Patty Pansing-Brooks and other people in South Dakota. It's really important that we look at things, though, like the addiction programs on Pine Ridge in order to work. We need to be really basing them in culture and realizing that there's cognitive changes in many that are needing services. Basing those programs to someone who has a fetal alcohol spectrum disorder would be helpful, or at least having the option of utilizing those services for the population that does. Education, educating the kids about drinking. It's so normal to them that it's very hard for them to understand, oh, that's why my cousin's so sick and has all those problems because her mom drank. They don't even comprehend that. And so the education in that system and also out of it amazes me how many people have never even heard of FASD. So, and then the education system on Pine Ridge really does need to be revamped and really provide some support to the kids so they can be more successful in life. Predatory sales outlawed, that would be Whiteclay. And then job development. The mean income on Pine Ridge is between $2,600 and $3,500 a month, a year, sorry. I wish a month. A year for most families. And that's, how do you live on that? Especially when the power company actually charges them more than they charge you for your power or wattage. And so like a lot of those houses, little houses, their power bill is like $600 a month. It's crazy. So there needs to be help with job development, job training centers, and really some supportive employment for people who need that. And I could talk about that forever, but I'm not going to. So here's some resources if you want more information. Are there any questions or comments or complaints? Okay.
I want to say thank you so much for sharing the story.
Thank you.
It's sobering, to say the least. And I was kind of curious how much you know about anything happening with policy, with the beer, the beverage industry, to sort of stop the sale of malt beverages that contain 6 alcoholic drinks in them. I'm sure, they've got quite the lobbying system.
Oh, they have so much money. I mean, Frank was bringing up at the movie last night that, Budweiser, their draft horses, do you know how much they spend on their care every year? $12 million. Those horses actually have masseuses that travel with them. They have the horse masseuse, So $12 million on their horses alone. Can you imagine? I'm sitting there thinking about all the things we could do with $12 million, and I'm like, oh my God. But I do know that right now, for the first time ever, the 4 liquor stores are actually having to apply as if they were brand new businesses. And so that application process is much more in-depth. It gives the Nebraska Liquor Control Commission the ability to really and honestly look at those 10 points I talked about. And they have to prove out that there's the population to support 4 stores. And with 9, that's, even at 12, that's 3 people a store. Because I've gone in and talked to the store owners they're like, we're not trying to sell to Pine Ridge. That's not even who we're selling to. The prairie dogs, there's nothing else there. I'm like, really? Let's be honest about that. But, so I think that's a good position that they're finally having to do that. But it takes people knocking on people's doors, writing emails, writing letters saying, we don't want to be known for Whiteclay. Whiteclay is an embarrassment. If you go there, it's gross. People poop on the walls. There's not a public restroom there. And so people literally will lean up against the wall and poop and pee. It's disgusting and a health hazard. And it takes people saying something. And I want to quickly introduce Frank Lemire, who's been fighting the fight on Whiteclay for 19 years. And then Dennis and Nancy Carlson, who are part of Fix Whiteclay in Lincoln, who were kind enough to drive me here. But Frank should come down and say something because really Frank's message is incredibly powerful, but no.
And I don't want to take away from this, but I will tell you, I'm listening to what you're saying on March the 7th in Lincoln at the Liquor Control Commission, history is going to be made.
That's the hearing.
They are making these 4 predatory stores earn those licenses. They are going to have to justify renewal of licenses that they have had. And I think it is going to be a historic day, for Nebraska. And all of us as Nebraskans are going to have to take a stand one way or another on that issue. And I want you to watch that on March the 7th, Liquor Control Commission in Lincoln. We're going to have a hearing. And the two sides, mainly attorneys, are going to square off, but I think there'll be hundreds and hundreds of Nebraskans there. I do want to point out to you that I believe that Creighton University is going to be in the house. Young people, University of Nebraska, Wesley, Briar Cliff, UNO. The young people from across the state and across the region have stood up and been counted on the issue. And I think that's extremely important. Just remember that day and keep track of the news right now. Because as I said last night in Lincoln, that we are at a tipping point. And all of us are going to have to keep track and see where this goes. I would share with you, all of you are involved in public health. And it's extremely important that every facet in our society, every perspective about Whiteclay right now be elevated. I mean, what I'm going to say really simply, there are things that I watch. Flint is in the news every day. It's a public health hazard. People are going to jail because of Flint, Michigan, and what we did to people. Child's play and what happened 6 hours west of here. But nobody looks at it that way, and I want you to be able to say that. And the other thing, Nora, I would share with you that's so very important right now, is that I think that as Nebraskans and as professionals, who you all are or are going to be, I think we're better than this. Mm-hmm. And she mentions third world, but nobody listens to that. But that's just hours west of here, and I really hope that you elevate the discussion, take an interest and see what you can possibly do. And there's so much that can be said about Whiteclay right now. But I think just elevate the discussion as you will. And she mentioned, and we talked about this last time, watch the Super Bowl tomorrow. Watch those commercials that Budweiser pays millions of dollars to show all of you with these plow horses. And it's probably way more than $12 million.
That's an old figure, but yeah.
And I want you to think if you watch those commercials tomorrow, and I will watch. And I will, not your word, but Frank's word, it is obscene what they do under the color of America. It's obscene what they do. And this is the amount of money that they send to Pine Ridge to deal with what they have brought there. And that in and of itself should give rise to some issues in your own mind, and I want you to really take a look at that. Lastly, I would share with you that, and I always challenge them at Creighton, I will challenge this institution. If anybody in the state of Nebraska, in the whole country, has moral authority to go say, shut this down, it is you folks. It's Creighton. It is you. And you know why? And some of you do. The Jesuits, missionaries there, the Jesuits went among the Lakota people to minister to them. You go to Red Cloud Cemetery up there on Pine Ridge, full of Jesuits. All of them, some studied here and went there. And Creighton forgets that. I believe that they forget that. Go to this basketball game going on right now. See Budweiser written all over this arena up here. And that always troubles me because this is Budweiser has their predatory sales has led to the disintegration of families. I'm going to say, not hyperbole, to say that it has killed tens of thousands. It has crippled scores and hundreds in the womb. And just think about that, if nothing else. It has crippled these babies in the womb. We talk about those things, but we don't act on them. Creighton has the moral authority to do it. And as we said last night, and I will say everything this month, there's no middle ground. It is either you stop the killing there or you let it go. And I know how I feel about it, and I hope the other Nebraskans feel the same way. And I appreciate the time, Nora. Nora being here today, I will share this. At this time, with this next month, it is not a coincidence. All of you being over here today is not a coincidence. Me being here today, I don't know why I'm here. It's not a coincidence. Something's supposed to happen. Something is going to be happening. And I want you all to be a part of it. If you have the nerve, and I'll leave you with that. Change it. If you have the nerve. None of you will. But it's a challenge for you. Anyway, thank you, Nora.
Thank you.
It'll be an interesting month. And there'll be a lot of Nebraskans, hundreds and thousands, who will have very spirited discussions. And we will see where it goes. Watch news.
Thank you guys for coming. I really appreciate your time. And if you have any questions or anything I can ever answer, just feel free to get a hold of me. So on the Stop FASD site, that's Ruth DeWing's site, and so if you email on there, it comes to me.
Thank you so much, Nora.
No, we have to. We're in church tomorrow to do some Whiteclay stuff, and then I'll head back tomorrow night. So. Yeah, hopefully, I know. My doctor's like, so you're gonna rest all week. Like, yeah, for sure. I didn't say I'm going to a conference. She called it.